We reached out to 20 current and former assembly line workers at 5 of the biggest recreational boat manufacturers in the country. These are people who laid fiberglass, ran wiring harnesses, bonded stringers, installed drain lines, and bolted down T-tops on the exact models that are now flooding the used market. We asked them one question: what would you personally never buy, and why? Most of them did not want to go on record. A few of them did. What they told us lines up with everything we have independently verified about how these boats were built, and it is going to make you look at every used boat listing on Boat Trader completely differently. The key thing to understand is this: the boats on the used market right now were not built under normal conditions. They were built during one of the most chaotic production surges the recreational boat industry has ever experienced. Plants were running extra shifts, hiring workers who had never touched a boat before, and shipping products as fast as molds could be pulled. One Mercury Marine production worker described his facility pushing out motors around the clock at peak output during the COVID surge. That same facility laid off 300 permanent workers in June of 2024, then furloughed another 1,700 hourly employees through the end of that year. That is what happened on the engine side. On the hull side, the story is the same. Mid-tier manufacturers raised production targets by 30 to 45% from 2021 to 2023. The boats that factories built during that period are now sitting on lots and marina slips everywhere, and the workers who built them know exactly what corners got cut. The first thing every factory worker we spoke to mentioned was wood, specifically wood core stringers and wood core transoms. At volume production price points, wood core is still the industry standard because it is cheaper and faster to work with than composite alternatives. A stringer is the internal backbone structure that runs the length of the hull, and it carries the load from the deck and engine down into the fiberglass laminate. When wood core stringers get wet, they absorb moisture, they soften, and eventually they delaminate from the surrounding fiberglass. The transom is particularly vulnerable because it carries the entire weight and torque load of the outboard engine. A compromised wood transom does not fail dramatically. It flexes slightly, then more, then the engine mount fasteners start to work loose, and by the time an owner notices something is wrong, the structural integrity is already seriously degraded. The process is slow and completely invisible from outside the hull. Workers at mid-tier plants told us that during the production surge, boats were being moved to the next station before bilge sealant fully cured, and that gaps where drain lines penetrate the stringer were sometimes not properly sealed before encapsulation. Once that stringer is glassed over, nobody can see whether the seal was done correctly. You will not know until you probe it with a pick tool years later and the wood crumbles underneath. At that point, the repair bill is not a few $100s. It is a haul out, grind out, and rebuild job that frequently costs more than the price drop you thought you were getting on the used purchase. The second issue that came up across multiple conversations was the chopper gun. In production boat building, two primary methods are used to build up the fiberglass hull laminate. Hand laying uses pre-cut sheets of woven fiberglass cloth applied with precision. The other method is chopped fiberglass, where a pneumatic gun chops continuous fiberglass strands into short pieces, mixes them with resin, and sprays them into the mold. The chopper gun is fast. That is its entire advantage. The problem is that the resin to glass ratio is controlled entirely by the operator in real time, and the optimal ratio is extremely narrow. Too much resin and the hull gains unnecessary weight and becomes weaker in proportion to that weight. Too little resin and you get dry spots, voids, and areas of the laminate with no structural integrity. At normal production rates, an experienced operator manages this well. At the production rates these plants were running in 2021 and 2022, many of the operators on those guns were not experienced. Workers described training cycles being cut from weeks to days to keep pace with demand. The third issue is wiring. Marine wiring in a saltwater application is one of the most failure-prone systems on any boat, and it requires specific installation standards to survive. Wiring runs need to be properly routed, supported at regular intervals, sealed at any penetration point, and terminated with marine-grade tinned connectors. Tinned wire resists the corrosion that stranded copper wire accumulates when exposed to salt air and humidity. At a well-run facility operating on a normal production schedule, experienced electricians follow ABYC wiring standards for every run on the boat. Under the production surge of 2021 and 2022, multiple workers described wiring runs being zip-tied to whatever structural member was closest, rather than being properly chased and routed. One specific issue that came up repeatedly was bilge pump wiring. The bilge pump float switch is the only automatic defense a boat has against water accumulation. If the wire run to that switch is poorly terminated or exposed to salt air at a corroded connector, the switch fails silently. The bilge fills. The owner has no idea until the problem is significant. Workers described boats leaving the factory with wiring inspections signed off at a pace that could not have allowed a complete check of every connection point in the hull. Now here is where the factory worker perspective becomes genuinely valuable. When we asked which manufacturer they thought consistently built the most disciplined hull, every single worker who commented said the same thing without being prompted. The plants that never compromised on no wood, never ran chopper-only hull laminate schedules, and never let production speed override quality hold checks are the ones worth buying. Grady White came up in every conversation. Workers who had experience at multiple facilities described the difference as immediately obvious. Grady White runs a hand-laid fiberglass stringer system that is precision patterned for each specific hull model, bonded while the hull is still in the mold, and fully encapsulated with no wood anywhere in the structure. Their specification sheets confirm this. The transom and stringer system is documented as water impervious. The factory runs closed-cell polyurethane foam into every below-deck void on every model, including models above 20 feet where Coast Guard regulations do not require it. Their own factory documentation states this directly, noting that most other manufacturers do not bother. The hardware spec matters too. 316 grade stainless steel through-bolted deck hardware is listed directly on Grady White spec sheets, and workers confirmed the difference between drilling into a properly through-bolted fitting versus driving a self-tapping screw into a fiberglass deck. Through-bolting distributes load across a backing plate. Self-tapping screws into fiberglass create a point load that eventually pulls out. On a boat running offshore in any sea state, the difference between those two fastening methods is the difference between hardware that lasts and hardware that fails. Now step back from the individual models and look at what the overall production surge did to the market. Brunswick Corporation, which owns Mercury Marine, Boston Whaler, and Sea Ray, saw revenue drop $1.16 billion in 2024 compared to 2023. Brunswick permanently laid off nearly 300 Mercury Marine workers in June of 2024, then furloughed another 1,700 hourly employees through the end of the year. BRP, which operated the Sea-Doo Switch pontoon plant in Sturtevant, Wisconsin, laid off nearly 300 workers in 2024, citing adverse market conditions. Bass Pro's White River Marine Group cut 176 workers across 3 plants. NMMA data, in partnership with ITR Economics, confirms annual boat building production is expected to decline through early 2026 before any meaningful recovery begins, and even that recovery is not projected to gain momentum until the second half of 2027. These are not companies throttling back by choice. These are companies that were overbuilt for a market that evaporated. and the inventory they produced during that surge is exactly what the used market is full of right now. The factory workers we spoke to were not trying to destroy the brands they worked for. Several of them genuinely liked the products. What they were describing was the reality of what happens to quality control when a plant doubles its production output in 18 months, hires workers with no boat building background, accelerates training timelines, and ships products on a schedule driven by dealer order pressure rather than quality hold verification. These conditions produce boats that look identical to boats built under normal conditions. From the outside, there is no way to tell. The gel coat is the same, the hardware looks the same, the electronics work the same on the day you take delivery. The differences are hidden inside the laminate, behind the liner panels, at the stringer connections, and in the bilge where nobody looks during a casual walk around. The inspection protocol has not changed. Moisture meter first, before any other evaluation. Anything above 12% in the laminate requires investigation by a certified marine surveyor before any offer is made. Pull every bilge access hatch and look for rust staining, debris left from the factory, and where drain lines actually terminate. Probe wooden stringers if they are accessible through inspection ports. Check every hardware penetration for backing plates versus bare screw holes going into fiberglass. Ask for documentation on dry storage and wet slip history. Count the years the boat was in a wet slip and treat each year as a compounding factor in your risk assessment. Get compression tests on every engine, regardless of what the hour meter reads. Budget for an impeller replacement as a baseline cost on any outboard with unknown service history. The deals in this market are real. New boat production will continue declining through early 2026, according to NMMA and ITR Economics joint projections, and a full recovery is not expected until the second half of 2027. Dealer inventory pressure is still elevated. Tariffs on imported marine components, steel, aluminum, and electronics introduced in 2025 have added further pressure to new boat pricing, making well-inspected used boats at current values even more compelling on a cost basis. The buyers who know what they are looking for are positioned better right now than at any point in the last decade. The buyers who take a used boat at face value because it has low hours and clean gel coat are inheriting exactly the problems the workers who built them already knew were there. The difference between those two outcomes is not luck. It is knowing what questions to ask, knowing where to look, and understanding that the most important parts of any boat built between 2019 and 2022 were never designed to be seen by the person who bought it.